Hello! In this video, we will be discussing another common shadow mapping artifact called surface acne. This artifact is also sometimes referred to as self-shadowing error. Let's watch the video to see the problem in action. In the video, you likely saw thick dark lines along the triangle edges of our terrain, as well as dark moving patterns on most every surface. These are the artifacts we intend to fix next. Like most issues with shadow mapping, shadow acne is caused by a lack of precision in our shadow map. In this diagram, each of the white lines represent a single pixel in our shadow map. The lower our shadow map resolution, the larger these lines would be, and the larger an area of our world would be represented by a single depth value. With this lack of precision in our shadow map, it is possible for us to determine a given pixel's depth from our light in our lighting shaders that is slightly larger than what is stored in the shadow map at the same location. The pixel pointed at by the blue arrow is one such example, and would erroneously be found to be in shadow. In fact, any pixel on the triangle that is under the pink stair steps would end up incorrectly being in shadow. There are two typically accepted solutions for this shadow acne problem, neither of which are perfect. The first option is to render only the back faces of meshes to our shadow map. Doing this will fix the self-shadowing problem, as the back face of a mesh will always be deeper than the front face, while the back face depth should still be smaller than the depth of any objects that would be in shadow. This is the solution I would suggest if it will work for you. But where does this solution fail? Rendering the back faces to the shadow map only will cause problems when you have objects without back faces. Terrain would typically be one common case for not having a back face. Sometimes the walls of structures will not have back faces. We know walls in our real world have thickness and insulation, but in a simulation, maybe a single quad will suffice. Except it will not have a back face and thus would not cast a shadow. Another solution that is very commonly used is to add what is called a depth bias. This depth bias is really a glorified magic number that you add to your depth comparison values. Either we add it when we write out depths or when we sample them. Adding this depth bias will push all our depths slightly higher and prevent the self-shadowing issue. So what should I set my depth bias to? There are white papers and formulas floating around that have some methods for determining what the value should be, but in practice the value is often dialed in and figured out through trial and error. We will need a value that is as small as possible, but is still large enough to fix the problem. Making this value too large will create a new problem, also with a silly name, this one being called Peter Panning. If we make this depth bias value too large, we will get some false negatives when determining if a pixel is in shadow. Meaning, our shadow mapping formula will tell us some pixels are not in shadow that really should be. This will most likely happen when the shadow and the object casting it are very close together, such as in the picture of Robot Boy, where we can see his shadow does not quite touch his feet. This is going to be particularly problematic when we are trying to do any complex 3D movement or platforming, as the shadow helps us understand where things are in a 3D scene. If the shadow does not touch the casting object, it can create an optical illusion that makes it appear like the object is floating above the ground. In the next video, we will be discussing one technique we can add to our shadow mapping routine to create more realistic looking results. This technique is called percentage closer filtering.